Well, thank you very much for joining us on our very first AlphaGenics webinar. I am the founder of AlphaGenics, Ross Tompkins. I'm joined by our lead clinician and business partner, Dr. Max Draper. So tonight we thought we'd talk about some of the myths to do with testosterone and TRT and share a little bit about our own journey. If anyone's got any questions at any point, then don't hesitate to reach out. Welcome, Max.
Hi Ross, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on. I've
Indeed, always a pleasure.
a little presentation about just the basics of testosterone and TRT. Really was what I thought I would cover tonight. But certainly happy to chat about whatever people want, or if anyone asked any questions, that would be hunky dory as well. Always happy to answer any queries.
Brilliant. Well, we were a little late, weren't we? So this is going to go out as a recording to everyone that signed up as well. But we might as well just jump straight into your presentation. So if you can share your screen, let's crack on.
Yeah, absolutely. If I go into presentation mode, how's that look? That coming up okay?
Absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Lovely jubbly. So this was just what I thought I would talk about, and it'd take about 15 minutes, I believe. It's just a sort of whistle-top tour of testosterone, why it's important, why perhaps we need to think about testosterone more than we are currently in the medical world, but also in the general population, and talk a little bit about what I do at AlphaGenics, sort of how I see my role. So to begin with, why do we need to talk about testosterone perhaps more than we used to? And I think these two studies here that I've got, both American in origin, but quite dramatic in their findings, just demonstrates what is essentially being consistently shown in the Western world, at least, that the average level of testosterone is declining. So this was really one of the studies that highlighted it to the medical world, or at least some areas of the medical world. So this initial study was older men between the ages of 45 to 79, and it ran from the 80s to the early noughties. And they essentially took three data points. And what each data point demonstrated over time was the average level of testosterone in that age range was declining. So it wasn't that these men were getting older, it was that the men at any given age in that range were getting lower and lower in their testosterone averages. So it's quite a dramatic graph there. Similarly, following on from that study, from 1999 to 2016, young men's testosterone levels were studied. And this was over 4,000 men were included in this study. And this was the one where you see quite often quoted on social media and online that the average 22-year-old man in 2017 had an average testosterone level roughly equal to that of a 67-year-old man in the year 2000. So that's often seen on social media just to highlight the decline in the average testosterone level we're seeing. And you can see in the graphs there that all age ranges included in this studies, their average testosterone level was getting lower. So it's quite dramatic. I mean, in UK units, this decline in testosterone is going from about 20, so an average of around 20 to around 15. So it's actually quite a dramatic drop. And you could this was a quote from a urologist in the USA, just highlighting the significant decline in the average testosterone level. 22% in that first study from 1985 to 2004. And then in the second study, it was 25% reduction in the average level of testosterone. So it's certainly going to become a more and more common issue if these trends continue, and we have no reason to believe they're not. Why is this occurring? I look at it in sort of largely two categories. One is lifestyle issues, and the other one is environmental issues. So we are seeing obviously increasing rates of obesity, particularly through the Western world, but obviously globally as such. And so alongside obesity, we're getting more insulin resistance, both of which will reduce the level of testosterone in a man's body, or very likely will do. Part and part of this will be the sedentary lifestyle, less muscle mass. All of these lifestyle things that we're seeing will, on average, decline a man's testosterone level. You could argue potentially that we're more psychologically stressed nowadays. That can have an impact on our testosterone. Maybe people are getting less quality sleep with blue lights, staying up late on their phones, etc. But the predominant thing will be the increasing obesity, increasing rates of insulin resistance. But then on the environmental side, which is something which is much more difficult for the average guy to control, we are being exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So easy way to think about these are, as a friend of mine, Dave Lee, says, it's plastics, pollution, and pesticides. So the three Ps. People think about these as the forever chemicals or microplastics or, parabens, things that people are exposed to on a regular basis, phthalates. What they're having is a disruptive effect to our hormones. So in men, if we're being exposed to these chemicals on a regular basis, through our self-care products, so what we wash with, what we bathe in, what we are eating in terms of what's been sprayed on the food we're eating, what it's been wrapped in, these chemicals are basically everywhere in modern life. And it's probably arguably nearly impossible to avoid them. But if you imagine if that all accumulates in our bodies, then it's going to potentially have a knock-on effect on our testosterone level. This is a far too busy slide and complicated slide, but in essence, what it demonstrates is that the man's hormone system in producing testosterone is not its own isolated system. It's affected by other health problems. It's affected by obviously local trauma to the system, either your testicles or the brain. But in general, this system in a man's body is not just its isolated self. It's related to everything else going in your body. So in simple terms, your testosterone production relies on, yes, your testicles, and it relies on your brain telling your testicles to do their job. But those systems can be disturbed by other illnesses, other conditions. And why does low testosterone matter? Well, in essence, number one is it can reduce a man's quality of life. It can cause symptoms psychologically, physically, and sexually. Now, sadly, with testosterone, you tend to find that most physicians, most people think about testosterone as purely either in the muscle area. So people talk about bodybuilders, abuse of testosterone, let's say, or they think about erection problems. But this list on the screen now is not actually all of the symptoms that low testosterone can be related to. There is more than this. This is probably the more common symptoms that I do see. And you can kind of categorize it into three areas: psychological, physical, and sexual. My history of low testosterone was predominantly psychological symptoms, actually, and some physical. But I wouldn't say that I had major sexual symptoms that would have prompted me to think, oh, I've got a testosterone problem here. So that can be a big issue in the general public and the general medical field. So common symptoms we'll see with low testosterone involve brain fog, poor concentration, which can obviously impact work performance, but also day-to-day life. People's sleep quality can be reduced. But a big one is that men become less resilient to stress, to what is demanded on them on a day-to-day basis can become quite overwhelming. So men often report anxiety, irritability, poor motivation, and just a general lack of contentness. Let's say they just feel low in mood on a regular basis. So it can be quite damaging psychologically. And then physically, a lot of men will complain of fatigue. That tends to be the most predominant symptom we'll see. And then, as I said, a lot of people think that it's just about sexual symptoms, but some men will have erection issues when they have low testosterone. Some will find their libidos reduced, but they don't have to have those symptoms to have a testosterone problem. But another big issue with low testosterone is the fact that it's actually bad for your health, or at least the science suggests so. Obviously, from the symptoms, you can see that you're going to have increasing rates of mental health problems if you've got low testosterone. But also, we're losing muscle mass or making it harder to keep or gain muscle mass. And it makes it easier to gain visceral fat, which is the fat around your organs, very bad for your health, or the fat under your skin, so the subcutaneous fat. So that cocktail is not good for our long-term health and longevity. We want to maintain our muscle as we get older, and we want to stave off as much fat deposits in areas we don't want it as long as possible. Alongside losing your muscle mass and making it easier to gain fat, low testosterone makes you have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And alongside this, we have increasing rates of heart disease and stroke risk from low testosterone. Testosterone is also important for your heart muscle pumping and functioning. And so if this is found from men who have heart failure, who have low testosterone, they do less well than men who have normal levels of testosterone in their blood. Because it affects our brain, like we said, psychological symptoms, it can impact cognition, how clearly you think. Men with low testosterone have an increased risk of dementia. Obviously, frailty comes from the fact it impacts your muscle mass, but also it makes your bones weaker and can actually lead to anemia, particularly in older men with low testosterone if it's left for a prolonged period. So shall I say my story, Ross, just to say how I got into this?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got some questions as well that have been shared as well by some of the people.
Lovely. So my story was essentially I was a GP for the best part of 10 years, and I had quite substantial health issues, which led to me having low testosterone. So I had testicular cancer at the age of 29, and 2 years after that, I had viral meningitis, both of which disrupted how well I could make testosterone. Now, being a GP, you might imagine that I knew a lot about testosterone, but sadly not, as a lot of guys will commonly find. GPs don't tend to be that well knowledgeable in this area of hormones. So I ended up going for about 2.5, 3 years with quite significant symptoms of low testosterone, but never quite knew. And it took quite a long time to be diagnosed. Now, when I went on TRT myself, it was completely life-changing. Low testosterone had caused me to have quite bad anxiety, quite sort of general sense of apathy, substantial fatigue on a day-to-day basis, and just overall, just my sense of well-being was very diminished. So when I went on testosterone replacement therapy, and it was rather life-changing to me, improved my anxiety very quickly, improved my mood, improved things like my body composition over time, improved my energy. That's what actually inspired me to delve into this field and learn more about men's health in general, but particularly testosterone. So I've been doing this or researching this work and doing this work for several years now. And it's certainly out of my own journey with the hormone as such. So hope that helped to highlight a little bit about why testosterone is so important, but also why we need to talk about it more perhaps nowadays.
Definitely. Thanks. I was getting a little bit of feedback there. Hopefully other people could hear that fine. Can you hear me okay now, Max?
Yeah, it's a bit tinny. It's a bit stuttery, but it's come back better now.
Let's go into a couple of the questions. So here's a great question. How do you know the provider offering me TRT is genuinely good? They're called
Yeah.
alphagenics. That's the answer.
I think if you know other people who are using providers, that can be helpful. I think if you look at also if they've got a group. So for us, alphagenics, we know a lot of other providers from other countries, for example, and they'll inter-refer. So I think that inspires, that implies there's confidence from other people working in this area if they're confident to refer to us when they have clients in the UK. So, for example, we've got a lot of American colleagues who refer to ourselves because they agree with the way we do things. What else could you say? Reviews online, although obviously that can be sometimes skewed. What do you think, Ross, is a way to find a good provider?
Yeah, I think reviews are important, but depending on where the reviews are held, things like Trustpilot, people, I know people can just, you can employ an army of people in the Philippines or India or something, they can just leave fake reviews. We use Doctify, which are all tested, so they're all genuine, real testimonials. So that gives more credibility. I think as well, you've also got to be cognizant of that if any provider will always give you testosterone, regardless of doing blood tests or regardless of asking any questions. That doesn't seem to happen very often in this country, but in America, there are lots of stories of, clinics that pop up and you just walk in and they say, "Hey, what do you want? No problem," and just start doling out all sorts of things. So I'd be worried if any provider wasn't asking detailed questions about history, medical history, and then running labs as well. So I think they're important things to add in.
Hmm. Maybe, yeah, as well, I'd probably think about more on the medical side of it as well. Just sort of thought about this from my end of it is number one would be, like you said, jumping to testosterone therapy without sort of a well-rounded assessment. Anything I would say, so our initial consultations are an hour. And that's because my job is not just about looking at the testosterone level and then saying, oh, yeah, this is the answer. You need TRT or you don't. So you want to be having an assessment with the team you're joining that is actually a detailed assessment of you, so that they get an understanding of what symptoms you have, but also what's your lifestyle like. Because if you don't know someone's lifestyle, well, you don't know how to assess their blood work, and then you don't know what to recommend to them either. So a detailed assessment, which takes time, is a good way of knowing whether it's a good provider. But also on a more deep, on a more sort of specific case by case medical side of things, probably the doling out of estrogen blocking medication would be a bit of a red flag. The use of HCG sort of from day dot, you could argue some cases for that, but I suppose if it feels like they're chucking a lot of things at you, particularly early doors, normally that's not a good sign, because even if you're going to use other medications, other agents, often it's best to take your time and almost add one thing at a time so that you know how that is going, rather than say, here's everything, you can buy this script, this script, this script, this script. And that can make things a bit messy. And sometimes that can be a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question here is, what does TRT mean to you personally? How has it changed your life? So, I mean, for me, it's night and day different. I've been on TRT for almost 11 years now, and at 47 years old, I'm stronger, fitter, healthier, with better clarity of thought than I was at 27. For me, you shared your symptoms earlier. My main symptoms were apathy, brain fog, and aches and pains. My joints just weren't my own. I would lay in bed on a nighttime and the pain I would have in my joints logically was probably only a 1 out of 10, but it was enough to keep me awake, laying there with this really low level ache I just couldn't explain. So that they were my worst symptoms. Again, same as yourself. EDs didn't jump to think straight away. It was a testosterone problem. Although looking back, the apathy definitely had low libido wrapped up in there as well, just because I couldn't really be bothered. So that was how I started. I was fortunate enough to find a doctor 11 years ago that spotted that, even after two NHS GPs and three endocrinologists all told me I was crazy in varying forms. The last one was the one that came the closest to actually saying those words, and he actually said, "It's all in your head. There's nothing wrong with you." Unfortunately, I did find a private provider then who said, "It's obvious you've got low testosterone." So that's kind of my story. And then years later, after trying three different doctors, after that initial one retired, eventually started Alphagenics. What about yourself? How have you changed, Max?
Oh, it's like you said, it's been hugely changing. That's what sort of inspired my whole career change, essentially. I think with low testosterone, I was on the road to nowhere, basically. It was very much day to day was kind of, let's just get through it. And in hindsight, it was kind of like I'm just waiting till I get old, I guess. It was very much lack of energy, struggling to just cope with day to day things that, now feel very run of the mill, normal things to do. but it became very difficult with low testosterone. It inspired a whole career change for me. So it was obviously quite dramatic. Um, and more specific, I think on a more personal level, I think it's made me able to be a better husband and a better dad. Um, so I think that's quite profound to day-to-day existence as well.
Yeah, well, not 100%. And we hear that a lot with our clients as well. Like, I know I'm a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better business person. I'm more focused at everything I turn my hand to. Whether that is, yeah, being a parent, being a husband, whatever you turn your hand to, you're better at it, I think, when your testosterone is optimal.
Mhm. Yeah.
Why is my GP not taking me seriously when I say I think I might have low testosterone? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, this is sadly what you see a lot. There's a resistance to testosterone. There's a resistance to checking it, which I think is very weird. And there's certainly a resistance to saying it's a problem, even when the levels don't look great. So I'm not sure. I suppose that's getting at why is it something that people often get gaslit about? Many men will come to us and they've been to their GP. Either they've had their levels checked and the levels were rubbish, but they were told they were they're kind of low, but kind of normal, um, which is often incorrect. But also they'll go and they won't get the blood test checked at all, which is very strange. Even when they have symptoms of low testosterone. I think one issue is purely as GPs, and I can testify this as having been a GP, the teaching on testosterone is very minimal. There's very little testosterone related education. Like I said before, during the presentation, is the biggest symptom, or the symptom you kind of just generally would know of would be erection problems, might trigger a testosterone consideration. But beyond that, the psychological and physical symptoms, which I I would say are probably the more common things we see in general. I think that the psychological, the brain fog, the apathy, the anxiety, those are probably one of the primary presenters that we get often is the psychological effects of low testosterone. So if you're not taught what to look out for, then that's obviously a barrier. So that can be where GPs can have a barrier to actually understanding it could be a hormone problem. Um, and the other end of the other side of the fence would be that there is a still probably a large degree of stigma against testosterone simply because of the sort of, I suppose, the correlation with bodybuilding, anabolic steroids, whether that's part and parcel of the thinking, I don't know. But I've certainly heard men say, I was told that they wouldn't check my testosterone because I had plenty of muscle, as if that's like a diagnostic visual thing. I mean, it'd be great if we could diagnose hormone problems with our eyes, but I'm not quite sure it works like that. So there's a little bit of stigma against testosterone, but there's also a lack of knowledge, I would probably say. And that's from having been a GP for many years and in hindsight, realizing I knew very little about the hormone and I wasn't alone.
Yeah, that's powerful, isn't it? Because that's not just a random or a non-medical person's opinion of what happens in the medical fraternity. It's you actually saying, yes, I wasn't taught.
Yeah, yeah. And plus, I think, beyond the stigma against it for the anabolic steroids, I just thought with the title of the webinar being myths, is I think testosterone was hit by two big, probably, well, yeah, we know now, inappropriate fears about the replacement therapy. So we got hit very early, TRT, with prostate cancer. So this concept that if you put a man on testosterone treatment, you're dramatically increasing his chances of prostate cancer. We know now that TRT, we've got big studies on this, doesn't increase your risk of developing prostate cancer. And the other thing was the heart disease thing. So there was various studies at various points on the heart disease thing where it's kind of like, is it neutral? Does it increase your risk of heart disease? Does it lower your risk of heart disease going on TRT? And what we know now is that low testosterone increases your risk of heart disease. And TRT is, at worst, neutral. many of us would say if you have a well done TRT protocol alongside a well designed, basically, or alongside a good lifestyle, then it's potentially going to improve your cardiac health long term because it gives you back the energy, everything like that, that then allows you to hit the other targets in your life. Because I suppose the problem with studying anything like heart disease is there's so many factors that go into you developing heart disease. So if you put one man on testosterone versus another man not, and then you follow them up, well, what's the guy on TRT doing versus the guy not on TRT? Is he eating well? Is he sleeping well? Is he exercising? And what's the other guy doing? So I think we can say it's at least neutral. I think personally, I think my heart is in better shape now than it would have been if I'd left it with low testosterone.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of other questions. Is TRT only for older men? We've already answered that. No, it's not. It's more likely to be required in an older gentleman, but we see even younger men now needing it because of all those reasons you said, environmental, but also internal issues as well. Does TRT cause infertility? That's a good question.
Yeah, great question. It's quite complicated, but at its base is quite simple to understand. So if you go on testosterone treatment, essentially your brain stops signaling your testicles to do very much. And put simply, your testicles make sperm and they make testosterone. So if your balls are no longer being told to do very much, your sperm count can decline when you're just taking testosterone by itself. Now, it doesn't mean that if a man is injecting testosterone, even just by itself, that he's going to be infertile. Many men have reasonable sperm counts on testosterone, on TRT. But the other thing to consider is, and this gets very individual because you need to know a lot more about the individual, what's their sperm count like going into treatment before they go on TRT. But there are other injections that you can take alongside your testosterone to essentially stimulate the testicles to do some sperm production. So I would say TRT complicates fertility, but it doesn't mean that you can never consider it if you've not completed your family. I've got how old's my baby? 3, 4 day old baby, my number three, and I've been on TRT for 4 years. So there are certainly ways around it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, of course, it would be considered a contraceptive if it was as easy as that. Um,
Yeah.
we would go, no problem, you don't want any more children, just go on TRT. But it's not like that, of course. Um,
Yeah.
does TRT,
Be the world's best contraceptive if it
yeah,
worked
yeah,
like as
exactly.
reliably as that. Yeah. Yeah.
Does TRT cause roid rage?
Mm. Yeah, often far from it, actually. It's usually quite calming. Because many men who have low testosterone actually can find themselves more irritable, often more on edge because of the fact that it's basically affecting how well their brain is working. So the reverse is often true. So if you put a man on testosterone who's suffering from low testosterone symptoms, you'll often find they're more calm, they're more considered, they're more able to cope with things because they have their stress resilience back. Um, yeah, it's often conflated with, I mean, some men, if you went, if you're on TRT and you go a wee bit high in levels, men don't tend to find their roid ragey. They just might find themselves a little bit more edgy, or their sleep quality might go off a little bit. It's not like someone what people think of as roid rage. No.
Yeah. Roid rage presumably is a thing, though, if you're taking all sorts of other things as well.
Yeah, I think some anabolic steroids can trigger, classically would be trenbolone, wouldn't it? That people can, classically would cause some men to have gone a bit crazy. But even then, I think there's a lot of individual variation between how they tolerate these compounds and things, but not in the TRT side of things. No.
Yeah, not in the yeah, and TRT is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because when we're talking about TRT, we're talking about medically supervised microdosing. So the minimum viable amount to give you the maximum amount of effect. So what makes you feel optimal. But in the media and certainly in social media, I think a lot of people talk about TRT and they talk about sport TRT and these higher levels that are really just anabolic steroid levels. They're putting in 2 or 3 times what we would probably consider to be normal. Do you come across that at all?
Yeah, well, sometimes yeah, often people refer to it as sports TRT as well, don't they? Or TRT
Yeah.
plus. And like you said, I think that's the wording is the minimal effective dose for symptom resolution or symptom correction. And that's what we're aiming for. And that can be the issue online and things like that, is that it gets conflated with more, you're taking doses to gain muscle specifically rather than you're taking TRT to correct a medical problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Good question is how do I know if I need TRT? And that's a good question, isn't it? Because it's not as simple as do I look at my bloods? Because we're all different. You could have two twins, identical twins, and they might have the same level of testosterone, but one could have symptoms and one might not. So it's a calculation made by yourself or another qualified physician, looking at both subjective markers. So what does the ADAM questionnaire tell us? What does the patient tell us about symptoms? And combining that then with the objective measures such as a blood test.
Yeah, absolutely. But also it's if you've got low testosterone or poor levels of testosterone, it's there's a big question there, and this is why why it takes time is working out, is TRT then the answer? Because sometimes it can be lifestyle stuff. Sometimes it can be correcting other medical issues, like if you've got a thyroid issue, for example, that can have a knock-on effect on your testosterone. So it's, do I need TRT is quite a question which requires quite a detailed analysis, or it should do, at least in our opinion, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a great therapy if it's appropriately used. But I wouldn't say just get a blood test if it's X, Y, or Z level, jump on TRT, because that's not how it should be, really.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody does start TRT, how long until they start to see results?
Yeah, it depends on what results we're after, because different people can take different lengths of time to get full, symptom correction, symptom resolution. Predominantly, what you tend to see is, assuming you're not someone who needs a very different dose to the one that you start on, because there's always outliers. There's always individuals who end up needing a lot more than someone else in terms of their testosterone dose. But let's assume your dose at the start of therapy is somewhere in the right ballpark and it gets your levels improved. That first 6 to 8 weeks, you'll tend to see at least some improvements in your symptoms. And I tend to say it tends to be the symptoms above the neck that tend to improve probably more quickly than the rest. So that tends to be the psychological symptoms. First 6 weeks, you might experience an alleviation of brain fog. You might find the mood starts picking up. You might find reductions in your anxiety. So a lot of the psychological benefits from TRT, you notice something maybe even quicker than the physical stuff. But the whole timeline of improvements is quite an individual's game. But it's certainly something that, it's almost like it's a funny one, because it works quickly, but it also takes time to see the full benefit. So it's kind of like it's definitely noticeably doing something, but it also takes, you've got to give it time to get the full benefits, because part of the benefit of testosterone treatment is essentially living with those healthy levels of testosterone over time. Because if you're more resilient to stress, if you're more driven, if you're more motivated, if you're more confident, well, hey ho, that ends up changing your life over a period of months into years, because you may take that job opportunity you would have been too hesitant before with low testosterone. You may end up doing something like martial arts. You might start going to the gym more regularly. All of these effects of TRT compound, because it kind of allows you to do the stuff that you would otherwise be too maybe hesitant, too anxious, or too tired to do with low testosterone. So that's where it can be life changing, is when you're on it for a long period and you reap those rewards of that positive cycle it gets you in.
Yeah, well, I can wholeheartedly agree with that. You know, I'm well on my way to being 50, and I know I'm going to be fitter at 50 than I am now at 47, and a hell of a lot fitter than I was when I was 27. And yeah,
Yeah,
at the moment, I don't know when the peak is gonna happen, but I know I'm not anywhere near it yet. Um,
nice.
which is
Yeah.
a great way to feel. How is TRT administered? Is there a preference? It comes in many forms, I believe.
Yeah, lots of options. Our favored or my favored form of administration is either a fairly frequent injection. Now, depending on the type of testosterone when injecting, some men will be able to do that subcutaneously into the belly fat, or some will use their muscles, like their delts, for example, shoulder muscle, or a cream. A compounded cream is the one that we tend to use. So essentially, the concentration and dose of that cream can be kind of dictated to the pharmacy, who then kindly make it up for us and send it out. So the cream is topical, so to the skin. And that the biggest difference is basically the cream has to be done every day. There's not really an option to do it less frequently than that. Most guys will do it once a day. Some will even need another application on an evening with the cream. But either fairly regular injections or daily cream tend to be my preferred routes of administration, simply because they get the levels good, people respond well to that, and those levels are consistent. So it's not what we're trying to avoid when we're looking at TRT for optimal results is we're trying to avoid big peaks and big troughs or inconsistent levels of the hormone, just simply because that's not where we tend to see the best results. And theoretically as well, that more consistent level will very likely be better for our health long term as well, rather than our body going through peaks, troughs all the time that are quite dramatic. Because other parts of your body react and respond to your testosterone, your hormone levels. So if you're sending your whole body through a roller coaster all the time in terms of your testosterone and the byproduct hormones as well, it's probably not as good for you as having nice steady levels in the blood.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Um, can TRT help with weight loss, and will I be on it for life?
Yeah, it can certainly help with weight loss. Partly because if you imagine when you've got lower testosterone or you've got poor levels, you are potentially going to have less energy. You're going to potentially have lower motivation, confidence, drive. So just simply put, if TRT just helped you improve those symptoms, then you're potentially more likely to hit the gym. You're more likely to do the right things day to day because you've got more drive, you've got more energy. So on a basic level, yes, it can help you because it helps you do the right things. But also secondarily, obviously testosterone is anabolic. So having better levels in your blood helps you gain muscle. And it also has a slightly sort of inhibiting effect on fat deposition. So yes, it can help you lose fat and gain muscle, which obviously over time really helps your body composition. So it's kind of two ways. Directly, the hormone itself has a role in the body, but also it helps you do the right stuff if it helps your energy, if it helps your recovery, if it helps your sleep, all of those other factors that actually make it easier for you to choose the right things to do, I guess.
Brilliant, yeah. And for those of you that some people have heard the words anabolic before, and not maybe knowing what it means, but it basically means building, doesn't it? And the opposite
Yeah.
being catabolic, which is to destroy or to take down. So when we talk about anabolic effects of testosterone, it's that building side of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's why they're called. So we use anabolic and catabolic in medicine all the time. So if you in a burning accident, then you're in a catabolic state. It just means that things are getting broken down essentially. So yeah, anabolic means building up. Tend to refer to it in the muscle world, but it's also got other uses as well. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And just a couple more questions. Um, are there any side effects, and will I be on it for life?
Yep. So obviously the fertility complication is something to consider. That needs to be chatted through with your provider and the options, and a plan made, I think. So if you're a young guy going into TRT, you've not completed your family, you need to have a good chat about that. Like we said, there are other injections that can be used. When do you use those? When do you add them in? How do you monitor your sperm count? Do you freeze your sperm before treatment? There's sort of like, like I said, it just needs to be hashed out with the provider in terms of the fertility front. If you don't use any other injections when you're on testosterone, very likely that your testicles might shrink to some extent. There are, HCG, it's referred to. It's another injection that can reverse that shrinkage or stop that shrinkage to some extent, depending on the individual. But some shrinkage is likely if you're just taking testosterone. And then other things in terms of side effects really depend on many factors. So people can get like oilier skin, maybe some spots. People at the beginning, you've got a cat there, is it?
Yeah.
It's fluffy. Yeah. You can so other side effects can be, for example, when you start testosterone, because you're going through what I almost call like a mini puberty, because you're going from a lowish level to a good level. You're going to go through some changes potentially there, but long term, I would say if you get your protocol dialed in, if you've got your lifestyle dialed in general as well, the chances are, or you shouldn't really be living with side effects outside of, like I said, the testicular ones from TRT. I wouldn't say, that needs
Yeah.
to be managed with protocol, but also lifestyle. You kind of need to meet the treatment halfway.
Yeah.
Oh, and for life as well. I keep missing that question. Yeah. So is
Yeah.
TRT for life? I think the way we would look at it is if it works and you're getting results from it, which many will, well, if you're going to carry on getting those benefits from TRT, then you have to you carry on taking it. If it doesn't, in those first few months, maybe up to 6 months, if you're not noticing any changes, if you think, well, what am I doing here? Well, you'd have a conversation with your provider there about whether you're going to stick on it, basically. But if it does its job, if it's working, I would consider it lifelong. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of a time where I would want to stop because
Mm.
I don't want to go back to ever feeling the way that I felt. Um,
Yeah.
I'm 11 years older than I was when I felt that bad. Like I'm presumably I'd feel worse than I did 11 years ago. So yeah, I definitely have no plans to stop anytime soon or probably ever. And the final question, which I don't mind answering, is how much does or should it cost? And I'd say things cost what they cost to a degree. So you pay for what you get. You can buy a bottle of testosterone from a guy down the gym for 20 quid. And we get many men that do come to us and they have self-medicated and they bought an underground lab bottle of testosterone, which they bought off some guy down the gym for 20 quid. It was probably mixed in someone's bathtub or in somebody's garage. You don't know what's in there. Is it even testosterone? Maybe they felt great because it's got Viagra mixed into it and it's got some trenbolone in there, so they've got great muscle definition. So you pay for what you get, or you get what you pay for, sorry. Um, if I go back to why I started Alphagenics, I worked with a number of different doctors before starting it, and all of them had very different price points. So one of them, I remember they got me in, it was £100 a month, and I thought, great, but that was only for the blood test. I then had to pay for the testosterone. I then had to pay for any other blood tests in the future. I had to pay for HCG separately. I had to pay for needles on top of that. So everything was on top, and some months I would end up paying £600 or £700, and then the month after would drop back down to 100. I know there's one provider out there that says they're £40 a month, but that's just for a prescription, as in the piece of paper that you have to take to a pharmacist to get your prescription. So testosterone, good quality testosterone costs what it costs, and any providers buying it from probably somewhere quite similar because there's only a handful of pharmacies in the country that can actually legally import it. And the quality of the doctor makes a difference. Obviously, talking to someone like yourself, Max, that has a cost implication as well. And chatting to you for an hour is going to be different to talking to someone that has very little testosterone knowledge for 5 minutes. So you get what you pay for, I would say. So when you're deciding who to go with, ask what's included. Are the blood tests included? How often are the bloods done? Is every blood test the same? Or over time, I've heard some people start testing less and less things. So the first one is a very, very good full test. And then after that, you get smaller and smaller and lesser blood tests. Are all of your medications included? Do you get 7-day-a-week customer support? Do you get a strength and conditioning coach as well? Do you get access to a mental health app? And I'm using these as examples because these are things that obviously we provide. But do a really detailed analysis when you're making a decision to who to go with, and add up all of those things over time, and you'll come to the right decision, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Well, we sadly get quite a few guys coming from elsewhere. One big factor is consistency and regularity of care. So they will go months without getting word back on when's their blood test due, what do their blood tests mean? So a lot of this can be, at least when you start TRT, it can be quite unnerving because it is a change. It's a fairly big deal starting injecting yourself with something or doing something completely new to you. And sadly, what you see with a lot of companies out there, or what I've experienced, let's say, is that they don't have regular touch points. They don't have regular contact with the client slash patient, so that the patient can feel quite kind of left to do things by themselves without at least some sort of feedback system or some sort of system where they can get in touch and make queries or voice concerns. And I think that touch point is very important, at least at the beginning when you're starting a new treatment, so that you have confidence in what you're doing and how things are going. You need that feedback system, because otherwise you feel a bit lost and uncared for. And you hear that quite often. But also time as well, like you said before, is you hear about reviews being a couple of minutes long. I'm looking at this sort of therapy as not just about testosterone. It's about overall health, overall well-being. How's the lifestyle going? Do we need to implement any supplements? Do we need to consider any other changes outside of the testosterone? Because I want to see overall health and well-being improve, rather than simply saying, your testosterone levels looking better, great, bye, you're out the door, carry on the same dose. Let's see how we're doing. How's the exercise regime? How's the sleep? How's everything going outside of that? How's the cholesterol look? How's the sugar level look? It's an overall health thing rather than purely inject this and your level will improve. It's very much so, I want to see overall well-being, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, I think that covers us for all of the questions. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. Apologies again, we were late at the beginning, but this will go out as a recording over the next day or two. Feel free to respond to that by email or book an appointment with one of the team, and we can answer any questions personally on a call, on a Zoom. So do feel free to get in touch. But Max, thank you very much, and I'll let you crack on with your evening.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Take care.